All right, now, we're going to just have a real loose panel discussion here. You can tell I'm not very rigid on how I do things. And my hope is, our hope is actually that, it becomes, I'm going to ask a question to start things off just to get some discussion going. My hope is that, we'll just have them debating or discussing things internally, maybe adding on, saying, oh, that was a great idea, what are you doing? That kind of stuff or whatever to keep the panel discussion going, because I think everybody learns from listening to that. As well as I'm hoping that I want to see the people in the audience or attendees here, if you want to get involved in the discussion, that would be great too. We had a real good session yesterday, I thought, with the questions. That there were a lot of questions that came from people, and it became what personally I had just a comment on yesterday. If you weren't there, I'm sorry, you missed I think a good session. Because we were talking about stuff, and then the questions that people were asking, I don't want to call them technical. One thing, I make a point of it, S4 is going on at the same time right here. And I think S4 I've never gone to S4, but I think it's a good conference. I presume it is. And it's always been very technical, but technical cybersecurity-wise. This was more discussions, I think, that was within the context of an operating facility and things like that. So those discussions, I think, were very good. And the questions, and we dug in, and nobody revealed anything about their company's operations that would be bad or anything like that. So it was a very nice discussion. I'm hoping that this one goes the same way. And it was because of the audience asking questions. So let me just start off the questions here. All right, my very first one's an easy one, if you remember. I sent these guys one of my questions. Let me see. I'll read what I wrote. The title of this workshop is IT/OT Cybersecurity Technology Convergence. I think most people will take this to mean upgrading OT with solutions having the same capabilities as those used to protect enterprise systems. And to maximize interoperability and reduce costs, I expect many people will go further and say convergence means using the identical solutions in IT and OT. And I think that I hear that a lot, actually. Now, how does this align with your company's view of IT/OT cybersecurity technology and convergence? And before I answer, I've been skipping stuff. I'm so sorry. I'm just a half here. Whenever you go to answer, I'll start here, but we'll go backwards. Backwards alphabetically. But why don't you just give a couple comments about your view of who you are, anything you want to say about what your company's doing with respect to IT/OT cybersecurity convergence, and in general, your views on it, I guess, and then you can answer this question or throw it into the discussion. I wanted to give them a chance just to make some opening comments.
Sure. My name is Blake Gilson. I work with computers occasionally. That's what qualifies me to sit up here. I think when we look at the technology landscape in terms of cybersecurity and what we need from a technology enablement perspective to defend against adversaries, threat actors that wish to do X harm, we have to make sure that our solutions and technologies are matching that threat landscape. So this is speaking not about IT cybersecurity or OT cybersecurity, but just cybersecurity in general. We have to make sure that we appreciate what we're defending against is a threat actor. Any particular technical recommendation and control needs to be matched up to a capability that we're seeing and we're trying to mitigate against. So when I look across what we need in OT, because I'm the OT cybersecurity function, you have to have an informed view of what's happening in the threat landscape. And there's a error that I sometimes see in this conversation where I only need to worry about OT threats. This is nonsense. Because let's talk about just super three-step, I'm not going through a kill chain, about what a threat actor can do. They first, on phase one, establish a backdoor, an access point, and exploit some type of vulnerability in people, process, or technology to have interactive access to some component to something. And please, forgive me, I'm overgeneralizing. Two, they want to be able to deliver some type of intent or action on an objective to steal data, to change something, to interact with something within your system. And then thirdly, to execute some type of cybersecurity physical attack. This could be a logic bomb that interacts with the system, that changes the process, et cetera, et cetera. The first two stages of this super generalized high-level attack item is indistinguishable from cybersecurity espionage, but it is the foundational components to any particular OT attack. So if we frame the conversation as I'm only worried about cybersecurity and OT, you're missing the boat. You're missing the key components we need to enable, and you're framing the question in a manner that you're going to be behind the 8 ball. So I think when we look at what technologies and solutions we need overall, we have to frame it appropriately. And while there can be instances where cybersecurity adversaries I do the IT attack and then I'll bring in my OT attack expert behind it, all of those particular protections and those kill chains have to be across your environment. And then it's a question, just given the specifics of that environment, expectations, support, complexities, the things that we'll have to talk about through this panel, is what particular item mitigates that threat, but then accounts for the unique characteristics of that environment. My opening remarks.
Okay.
All right, so I'll give this IT OT convergence question comes up not as much as it used to, but a fair bit in Shell, and so my take on this is because right out the box you would think that, well, we're just gonna, if you think of like a zoning conduits picture, you have your OT security zone and your IT security zone, and you don't want people to misinterpret this as, and those two zones have a DMZ between them, right? And so you don't want to have just be interpreted as we're going to remove that DMZ and we're going to collapse these two security zones into all one big happy zone. That's not what this is. We still have an IT zone, we still have an OT zone, and we have a DMZ between them. And so what it is that, like you've said earlier, Sid, it's really about a technology convergence. If you think back 20 or 30 years and you went into a plant and you opened up some of the panels, it didn't look like IT computer equipment, or let's say 15 years ago. You'd have some kind of proprietary communications equipment, some kind of proprietary computer that's running the HMI. But today, if you buy a brand new system, and then you go into that automation facility and you open up the cabinet, what you can find is a bunch of racked up Cisco switches and a bunch of racked up HP servers running Windows operating system and using a lot of software that, and even protocols that we find in the IT environment, right? So we're beginning to use technologies and tools that that IT has historically used. We're bringing that into the OT environment because it scales well. It's cheaper. Cost has been one of the drivers. And also we can bring ways of working and how to manage that equipment, right? If we have a lot of the same equipment, then we can use proven IT management methodologies to manage that equipment. And so that's how I see the IT OT convergence. It's about the technologies. And the other big difference is that we're applying these technologies to two different solution domains, right? So the OT domain is basically managing more of a physical world and in those physical processes. And in the IT zone or domain, we're managing basically it's about information management, right? So with two different solution spaces, but we're applying the same technology these days, right? That's the way I see that. That's the way we explain that within Shell. And one of the sort of gray areas is this IoT or IIoT. There's we do a lot of that, but the way we see that is we stick that in a different security zone than the OT zone, because that tends to have to be provisioned up into a cloud service and all that. So, and it doesn't really interact with, it's just measuring or collecting data. It's not really interacting with the physical process. So as of right now, we treat that as a separate security zone. Yeah, so that's kind of the way I see that.
Keith?
All right. I guess I got to grab this a little bit so you can hear me. I can share.
Yeah, we can share.
Yeah, but I mean, I can share. I mean,
Oh, okay.
Mama taught me to share. No, I think I liked a lot of how you explained it, so you kind of saved me some time from a BASF perspective. But But I had to do a correction because otherwise Rob, who's my manager for security, is gonna fuss me. Your chart had a error, at least for BASF, because you talked about the firewalls and you talked about, secure remote access. Well, that was actually developed by the OT security guys at BASF, not the IT security guys. So just to clarify that.
Go ahead. I'm gonna you go right ahead. I have a good
Now, and look, I like what you were saying about the zones and everything. And to be honest with you, I mean, from an IT technology standpoint, there are things that exist there that are going to be relevant, and they're always going to be relevant. And that's why the collaboration between the two teams has to happen, because they do have the technologies that are needed. For me, I divided a little bit on the processes because unfortunately, you have to have some more flexibility than what IT security gives you on your business side, okay? So from an OT perspective, if you don't have that flexibility, you're gonna cause production upsets. So I always like to look at the whole layered approach as IT security is the offensive lineman, and OT security is my quarterback and running backs. And so if my offensive line protects me, I should be less worried down at the OT level. But the more I open the door, then exactly what he said about the more the threats are in existence. So.
Yeah, let me just mention something I forgot to say, because you reminded me that in that OT domain, we have more constraints, and I think that's what you're referring to. We have more constraints, like, you can't reboot the computer right now because it'll bring down a process, right? There's many other constraints, when you can do upgrades, you have to do it in the maintenance window, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's one of the other differences between the IT zone and the OT zone.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next, and I agree with everyone on the panel here. I think it's important to start with what's the mission of OT security versus IT, and those are different, right? IT's traditionally been about protecting data, protecting networks, and then OT, we want to make sure that our processes keep running, we keep making money, and that everyone's safe. So the missions are different right there. I know this is technology, and Sid, when you were presenting, you talked a bit about, maybe people are focused on the people convergence first, or integration, or people get hung up on words. I think that's one of the problems, but the people convergence, integration, collaboration, that has to be continuous along with the technology. That is still the biggest problem that we see. It's a people problem, it's not technology. And when I see people getting triggered by a word, that tells me that we're pretty far away from kind of working together still, right? We need to be able to communicate, and sometimes people communicate differently, and I think that is still the focus. And if we could use technology to improve human collaboration, humans working together, that's really important. Our OT security practice sits underneath the CISO, but we have a dotted line into our engineering function. So from a day-to-day perspective, we have IT, OT, security professionals, as well as process control engineers on the same team working to solve problems on a day-to-day basis. This is not a community of practice. This isn't a team that comes together and chats once in a while. This is a team that's working together day in and day out to solve problems. One of the overarching guiding principles that we have for our OT security practice is to leverage IT security technology and capability where feasible. Now, does this mean that we have the same IT and OT technology? No, we're far from having the same technology. But what it does mean is that we evaluate technology, we understand the benefits of doing it, we understand the risks of doing it. Is it protecting us from the threat actors that we know that we need to protect against, not just what the ones the IT guys say we have to protect against? And if we can get value, then we move forward. So, one of the key areas that we had success with IT-OT convergence is with secure remote access. But that wasn't just grabbing something on the IT side and bringing it into OT. On our IT side, they have a platform approach. So we have a number of IT platforms. And so when we looked at secure remote access, we said, how can we leverage those? We leverage our cloud platform. We leverage our identity management platform, our identity governance platform. We even leverage our ITSM platform as well, and then a PRA solution. So we have something that leverages a lot of IT capability for secure remote access in OT, but it's not used in IT at all. But we use those IT platforms in a way that serves the requirements and the needs of what we have in operational technology.
Yeah, can I make one more comment?
Feel free.
There's
Feel
another
free.
area that kind of falls into this convergence story is that, you know, we're seeing more connectivity, let's say, up between the OT zone and the IT zone, and even out to third parties. And so that kind of falls in this area of convergence, you know, confusion. And so to me, that's not convergence either. That's just, I don't think it's even integration. I think it's more of an interfacing. So for example, we're seeing more projects where, you know, to save money, we may want to use energy when it's cheapest, right? So that means we need to have some kind of input from a utility. And so we'll have to connect. There has to be a connection between that utility and our OT zone to feed the DCS, you know, set point or something for turbines or something. And so we have to make that connection. And the way I see that is it's an interface between the OT zone and this third-party utility. But sometimes that's kind of considered, okay, we have all this connectivity to, you know, outside the OT zone, that's convergence. But I see that as just an interfacing, you know, of systems to other zones.
Does anyone have a question? I've got lots now. Guys just fed me a lot of stuff. Please.
This is going to kind of go more.
Oh, do you want the mic? Go, bring it up here, EJ. Yeah, okay. I'm sure everybody heard you, but go ahead.
So this is going to go a little more toward the oil and gas guys because I know how we do it, but I'm thinking about differentiation. Like, you know, I watch a lot of Landman, so I'm learning a lot about how oil and gas works
That was
now.
a good show.
You know, I mean, great show. So you have all this remote equipment out in the field. You don't have an operator. We talk about secure remote access. The way we deal with secure remote access is we have it be hosted. It ensures a mock process that the operator knows who's in the system. If they host it, they build it, somebody gets in, they help them, they tear it down. But what do you do for these things that are field equipment that there's no operator? How do you guys handle your secure remote access for those things where there's not somebody there to host it? I've always wondered about that one. I mean, you got wellheads that are under the seat, right? So it's like somebody's got to be working on that equipment, and I don't know how do you deal with remote access in those cases?
I could go on that because, well, we just addressed this issue recently, and we're still rolling out. So we have like our scope's over 150 industrial assets. They're all different. Some are more like SCADA systems, like you're describing there. Others are more refineries space. But you know, even in Houston, we used to have rooms where like vendors would come in just so they can get remote access to some of our offshore platforms because they wanted that secure connectivity out. And with our secure remote access solution now, we have basically someone that could sit up over their shoulder. So someone has to approve access to get in. So they can't even try to authenticate till they have an approved ticket from someone that's saying, what are you going to do? And the person that's responsible for that asset approves it. After they have that, they can get in through a dedicated window. So the person that approved it knows that window is, and the virtual secure remote access allows them to join the same session. So they can watch exactly what they're doing, when they're doing it. They could kill that connection if they want to. All this stuff that they can do, just like if they were at the site itself. They're going to be remote. Yeah, they'll be remote and they'll be able to watch behind them. And if they want to kick them off because they don't like what they're doing, they can do that as well. Right.
Oh, over here?
Yeah, I had a question.
Oh, John Cusimano? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
Yep,
think
John Cusimano with Armexa. I'll direct it to the whole panel, but I guess maybe a little bit directed to Mark because I've seen you talk on bow tie analysis here before. And one of the things that this discussion got me thinking about is, you know, there's the left side of the bow tie, which is all your preventative technology, your preventative barriers, and then the right side of the bow tie, which is all your technologies or mitigation activities. And one thing I'm thinking with this discussion is the preventative technologies probably lend themselves better to be kind of leveraging IT technology in the prevention side. But one of the advantages I guess we have in OT is that we can mitigate using things other than cybersecurity tools. we can mitigate with separate safety instrumented systems or safety instrumented functions or through procedures or other mitigative technologies, then maybe because we're cyber physical, we have that option, whereas in IT we don't. And I guess the gist of my question is, does it make sense to say that the left side of the bow tie is where you really could probably leverage IT and OT working better, sharing a lot of the same technology, whereas on the right side is probably going to be more OT domain specific?
Everybody understands left and right here? I mean, in his terminology, yeah, of course, yeah, but you know what I mean? Okay.
Yeah, so the a safety bow tie is generally, at least in my experience, and how I learned about safety bow ties, is a safety bow tie, right? And so when you look at HSSC, HAZID, HAZOP, PHA types of processes, those are done to identify hazards and then to select barriers that control barriers and recovery barriers. And control barriers are arranged on the left side of the bow tie. In the middle of the bow tie is the hazard, like a hydrocarbon gets released into the environment would be when the hydrocarbon is a hazard, the event is get released in the environment. That's the middle of the bow tie, so you want to prevent that. So a control barrier is designed to prevent that. But then if it does happen, then you have recovery barriers that can mitigate that, try to reduce the severity of the consequence, right? So that's basically what the bow tie is. But fundamentally, in the safety world, to my knowledge, at least within Shell, there's not ever been a cybersecurity control like a firewall or a backup process or a antivirus or anything like that. There's never given credit to a cybersecurity control as a safety barrier or a safety recovery barrier, control barrier. Where cyber comes into the bow tie model is that, let's take a SIF, right, safety instrumented function, that's implemented on a processor, right? It's often, or almost always these days, on a network. And so we're probably all familiar with Trisis. That was the attack on the Triconics safety system. And so we know it can be attacked. It's still a complex attack, but it's possible. And so where cyber comes into play is that it's in a bow tie model, there's a concept called escalation factor. So anything that can degrade a safety barrier, so if your safety instrumented function can be degraded, then you have to protect against whatever could cause that degradation. And a cyber attack is considered an escalation factor. In other words, a cyber attack can degrade the effectiveness of your SIF. In fact, it could cause it to be completely non-operational, right? And so that's where we categorize cyber security controls, is in the escalation factor box. And so we want to make sure that we design our safety instrumented function and where we put our controllers in the network and how we manage the safety engineering workstation. We focus on cybersecurity controls in a way to make sure we reduce the risk of any kind of impact on that safety instrument function, right? So that's kind of the way I see that. I'm not sure if I answered your question or where that sits, but I don't see cybersecurity controls as barriers in that bow tie model, unless you change your entire bow tie model to be looking at cybersecurity events as the middle, right? As the hazard. You can look at that. That's a whole different.
And we do have those. We do have those at BP. We have those at BP. We created bow tie models on cyber events, essentially. Yeah. But I think your point, Mark, about the escalation factors is key, because you're going to see more technology used in safety going forward. So they're going to be more vulnerable to cyber attacks as well. But yeah, I think on the right-hand side, what's key for us and where we need to improve, when you look at a bow tie from a cyber incident point of view, it's the ability to restore, backup restore. And we got backups. Can we restore those backups? Yeah. So the impact of being down for a few hours or a few days is significant, right? So when we look at the bow ties from a cyber incident standpoint, I'd say the right-hand side, it's really about that recovery capability. Yeah.
I was going to add, to kind of simplify, John, how I look at it is the safeguards we're looking at when we do a risk assessment, are they reducing the likelihood or are they reducing the consequence? And I mean, it's the same thing as the bow tie, but we use those terms in a cyber risk assessment that seems to fit a little better than when we go into our functional safety terms and go into deep dive. That's it, because a majority of the things we do in cybersecurity are reducing the likelihood. However, some of those scenarios, those deviation cases, it's credible that, hey, you know what, look, if it goes down, it's a business finance process interruption, it's not a catastrophic event, but I have a control that says, hey, I've got my immutable backup, I've got my things that allow me to recover fast enough to reduce the consequence, so it's not a week outage, it's then limited to a shift or a day type things. So, you know, and that's kind of how I try to couch it when we talk about those things, but still the majority, we want to prevent them, and that's where most of our controls take place, and like you said, a lot of the IT controls. The more lead time you've got to let you know that something is afoot here allows you, it's the whole principle of security. Time buys you defensive options. And if you give away that time, then when it happens, you're not able to respond well enough.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way to think about it. That we have to, our discipline is an intersection of two separate, historically separate disciplines. One, cybersecurity, and then one, instrumentation controls, process engineering, whatever term you want to do it. So of course, the overlap of those intersection, we will draw upon controls from both of those, and we have to walk in both worlds. Congratulations, we all get our check mark for attending an engineering-oriented conference. Go to an IT cyber one and learn about their set of challenges they're having too. And the way I view it isn't necessarily like there's a collaboration opportunity on the left side of the bow tie versus the right side, is that if you take something like the SANS Institute's redone Lockheed Martin attack chain, where there's stage 1 and stage 2, our objective is to give us more opportunities to enact a defeat against the adversary pulling off those sessions so they can't get that low to get to whatever their objective is. If we view that I'm going to stop them because my SIFs are all secure and I'm going to do no other control on top of it, that's horrific, right? We have to be able to, at every stage of it, give us more opportunities to prevent them from having a string of W's. It's the string of W's that allows them to accomplish their objective, and we lose in the end. We need, so now getting back to the technologies we need and the capabilities we need, is that we need more places to enact losses on our adversaries across that kill chain. And that's where we have continued opportunity for improving the technology stack in the OT space to learn from what's working in IT, learning about what the adversaries are doing that component to be able to better defend those environments and be able to catch them at whatever particular component. Where I sit right now in the OT space is we're inadequate. There's no way we can look at it. We have lots of excuses for it, but some of our process control domains are the size of IT domains for mid-sized companies. And we're trying to say we don't need to defend this domain from a technology perspective onto the par that we would defend an IT one, insert complicated reasonings here, right, for why that is. We're moving in the right direction, but we have to keep doing it and having more opportunities for us to win.
Did you have another question back there, someone?
Yes. So Mark and Blake, I noticed earlier you guys spoke specifically about the introduction, and even now, Blake, you noted utilizing and optimizing the use of your IT expertise in securing your OT asset. That's a cultural difference. We all know that, and we all understand that. One of the most important aspects of it for Mark was that outage, right? Downtime. One of the things that are concerned that is we can do reinforcement or enforcement technology or enforcement of security assets in IT easier because there's less impact to outages or with emphasis on minimization of downtime versus OT. So if there was a solution that can say, do a non-intrusive enforcement capability on the OT assets, similar in the concept we implement in IT as part of your concept in introducing IT concept for security, cybersecurity in the OT asset, would that be something that you would think that could gain traction in your particular operation?
Are you talking about using some technology that would improve our resilience, but it would not introduce the, probability of like. or
Downtime.
Requirement to cause downtime. Yeah, I mean, so that would lead me into saying, okay, well, what are we doing, in regards to adopting, IT technology specific to cybersecurity controls, not just, HP servers or Cisco switches. So we are, and I would say that we're a little behind the curve as well. But in my view, we have a lot of assets scattered around, and we have assurance processes that we have a standard, and we use an assurance process to periodically assess whether the assets are meeting the standard or not. And we're not, we're not all green. If you look at that heat map, you hope it's green, but it's not, right? So we have work to do. And so part of that is adopting, the tooling that we can from IT, because we do have a very mature cyber defense team in IT. And so adopting that tooling where we can. So right now, like one of the tools we have is we have rolled out network management, something like, SolarWinds or what's up Gold in the past. So that's just basic, network and system administration and doing, uptime analysis and so forth. So that's a tool. So that's instrumenting the OT domain some. And then now we're in the process of rolling out anomaly and breach detection, which is going to bring in more information. And so, but this time we're going to stand up an OT SOC to go with it, right? We haven't done that yet. We obviously have an IT SOC. And so now we're going to have this additional instrumentation into the OT zone. But we want to bring that into a SOC so that we can have that support across all the assets. And of course, you still have to deal with all the constraints. And like one of the constraints is that we have some adoption challenges, right? So if we go to a site to install this anomaly breach detection kit, they'll say, no, we have one site that's having some uptime issues, trying to keep it going. No, don't touch anything right now. You have to come back later, right? So you have to work around that kind of stuff. But yeah, in my view, we need to adopt as much technology as we can into the OT zone and sort of walk that high wire, but without causing availability problems. And so in order to do things more in an automated manner, right, rather than manually, we still have to do a lot of things manually, like patching in most cases, but maybe at some point in the future, patching will be automatic, but that's probably way down the road. But yeah, I do think we do have to adopt IT technologies, IT ways of working, and mature the OT side up to where IT side is in terms of maturity.
Yeah, what I was getting at is exactly what you're in alignment with. So you mentioned patching, and we're seeing traction on the notion of virtual patching for those assets that are unpatchable, that you have threat vectors on. So those are some of the IT things that I'm seeing that is actually slowly making itself into the OT as a consideration. So yeah, I'm glad you guys are kind of like seeing that too.
Let me step in this time. No, because, yesterday we had a panel. It wasn't my panel discussion, it was the other one. It was during the session where you gave a presentation. But the issue of next generation firewalls came up, and it's a fuzzy area. But let me ask, to me, if I have a system that's 20 years old, and maybe it probably has firewalls in it, somebody probably has network firewalls, but the capabilities of that firewall, I think, are much, much less than a modern, and I'm still using the word IT, and I'll say a Fortinet or a Cisco. What I know from those companies when I talk, the amount of extra stuff, capabilities they have put in there now to be able to detect stuff, to micro-segment things, to block things with policy levels, granularity, all that kind of stuff. To me, that's the kind of stuff, if you could use that, why wouldn't you want that? But I don't see how that would interfere with anything in OT. So my question, I've just made a statement, more than a question, but is how do you kind of define because I've been using, and I'm very guilty here, I've been using the word IT technology and OT technology, and what does that mean, when I know the extreme cases, like somebody says, well, go and put in an EDR solution here that's going to collect a bunch of stuff and send it up to the cloud, and it's going to come back down and change. I don't think you're going to risk that. There's too much connectivity. There's too many things you might not be able to control, stuff like that. But to go in and say, I want to put in more technology that gives me more capabilities to do things, even in the safety case that we were talking about with the safety system, why wouldn't you want to have as much capabilities as you can get? So now there may be reasons why. So let me ask this. How do you define the difference between IT technology and OT technology, security technology? Let me just say that. And maybe
Hey, Sid, could I talk about the firewall use case for a sec?
Yeah, please.
I mean, it's another area we've been working on for a really long time. All of our OT assets have a perimeter firewall that's a next-gen firewall. But we have a OT operational team that manages that. And then we have a person that's accountable for the policy at the site. And there's a process where when a request comes in for a policy change, we analyze that. We got a firewall analyzer rule, give it a risk rating, and then the person at site that's accountable for that security needs to approve that, and then that gets put in place. We do similar things on the IT side. It just happens to be different firewalls, different team managing it. But one of the next-gen features that we are using is the application control that they have. So it's similar to the point that was just made not too long ago, is we have a lot of old stuff at a lot of our sites, and sometimes you can't protect that endpoint. So what do? You want to move that protection a lot of times to the network. And so if we could segment those devices and have some of the AV and protections that you would normally get from your endpoint on the network, now we call it a compensating control, right? We don't have our normal control that we have on the endpoint, but we're compensating that with separate network isolation and features from the firewall itself.
Somebody else?
It's a difficult question, but I'm not sure if it even makes any sense. So if Hirschman,
My question?
yeah, no, your question's good, but the conversation may not mean anything, because if Hirschman releases a next generation firewall, we say that's an OT firewall, because I think 80-90% of their sales are into OT process control environments. But if Fortinet releases a firewall, the vast majority of their sales is IT, so it's an IT firewall. So at this point, what are we even talking about here? We need to have a conversation about functionality, capabilities, and support, because historically, there's been more innovation within it from historical IT companies detecting threats, blah, 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 a lot of R&D. But the capabilities in some of the legacy OT companies that sold into more the state designed their solutions to be more effective for operations to be component or have certain characteristics and capabilities. So as every different company looks to expand into their market, and I've been incredibly pleased with the continued investment in the OT security space to give us additional opportunities to defend our environment, we have to have a conversation about capabilities. And those conversations around capabilities will drive the conversation about support, who needs to support them, and what does our skill, the operations need to provide. And I think you, in your opening remarks, nailed it exactly. These advanced capabilities requires a new skill set, but who will pick up that skill set? Is it going to be the process operator who's dealing with process alarms across his screen? No, it can't be. I don't want him worrying about signature detection updates on it and false alarms. We have to augment and change the way we work, and that's what I think our discipline, OT cybersecurity, needs to focus on, develop that context and provide that as a service to capability. That's how we scale. That's how we defend the environments. That's how we don't burden operations with the new ask that we're giving them.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, because you was wanting a definition. And for me, when you talk about it purely as IT technology, you can drop the IT and OT for the technology for cybersecurity. It's all one technology and it's a basket. And it's more got to be based on the functionality, the requirements you have, and the capabilities. And that's really how we need to start talking about it, not looking at it as two different technologies, because it really isn't. It really isn't. It's just what do we need functionality-wise at the protection layer at OT versus what we need at the protection layer at IT.
But do you see, the one thing I tend to see, and I think Blake said, I'm sorry, Mark, if you had a comment.
I'll make a comment as well.
Go ahead.
So one thing, the term operational technology is, I don't know, it's relatively new. I mean, we're just now adopting that within Shell. We're kind of behind the times. And we used to call it process control domain. It's not about process control. It's much more than that now. But, okay, so what is OT? Well, OT is just operational technology. In that, when you think about the Purdue model, at the lowest levels of the Purdue model, that's where you kind of get into unique, operational technology, instrumentation, sensors, maybe some still proprietary protocols down there. And then you have your DCSs and your PLCs, and you don't typically see in a IT data center about a rack of PLCs, right? But then when you get up to layer 2, supervisory control, you start seeing the HP servers and the Windows operating system. And so you get further up that stack in the Purdue model, now you got the overlap. You're still using some of that stuff in the OT zone, but now it's just common IT technology, right? It's IT, OT, it's the same stuff, right? So only at those lower levels of the Purdue model do you have that sort of unique OT equipment. But then there's OT security, right? So there's OT, operational technology, but then you have operational technology security. And like you said, that's kind of, we use the same tooling, right? We do system hardening just like IT. We use antivirus just like IT. We use anomaly breach detection just like IT, et cetera, right? So it's kind of the same.
Yeah, it is. And just to add more complexity to it, when you go down to that lower level at L1 and we start talking about APL and introducing, advanced physical layers on Ethernet-based backbones down at the lower level, we're going to have to go down to that with that cyber technology that we need to have, because it's going to open a new door as we start to explore on APL. And so right now, I agree with that breakdown, but as we keep pushing the envelope for more and more data, we're gonna get down to those levels as well from a security standpoint.
Let me
Go ahead, say that. I was going to talk about the Purdue model stuff,
Okay.
but I mean, go ahead.
No, but it was the comment Blake made, and I think it was really relevant, very relevant. But my question is this. We all know there are companies out there that primarily sell technology to the IT world. And in the networking areas, it's Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco. Now, all of those companies I just mentioned, there's others. I apologize if I skipped anybody, but there's others. But most people call those IT cybersecurity, IT networking equipment. Now, they have big practices as well in OT. It gets very confusing for analysts because you say, how much do you sell in OT? And they're going to tell you, well, I sell this much to the energy industry. I mean, they don't even say oil and gas. They'll say energy industry. Now, where do you use it, though? Do you use it in the office? Do you use it in the plant? And nobody knows, all right? Nobody can give you that. So it's very confusing. But still, what I see as an analyst is those are the companies, and maybe it's because I talk to them a lot, but those companies versus, say, automation companies, and no disrespect to automation companies or other companies maybe that are pure networking, industrial networking, they just don't, they're solving a certain set of problems. The companies like Cisco, Fortinet, they're solving a much different set of problems. And I think they're adding a lot of capabilities in order to solve those problems. And you could take advantage of that. I mean, something like, to me, being able to micro-segment if you want. The ability to do that is so much more. It's not just simply, a VLAN anymore. I mean, it's much more capable than that. Why wouldn't you want that in the OT network, in the OT environment, within the plant networks? Why wouldn't you want that capability to be able to use it if you can? You want to stop somebody, you say, right now it used to be, well, it was only the devices in this zone can talk to the device, can't talk to the devices in that zone, a zone. And then we got sophisticated. Okay, well, this one can't talk to that device or some other way. You come up with VLANs and have a bunch of different ones to reduce the zones. Now, they can say, this one can only talk to that one with this kind of a message and this kind of a time, all kinds of sophistication that you can build.
And Sid, the
So
problem,
I'm just bringing that up. So I guess
what you say, why wouldn't you?
that's my question. Yeah.
The big reason why I see is you always have to do no harm. That's our first principle with whatever we do with OT security. And so when you get into micro segmentation, you got a lot more configuration than you do just with VLANs. And so if someone misconfigures something and then we take a process down, that's not good, right? So I mean, you have to be able to make sure you have full confidence that you're not going to do more harm than good. And I see there's a risk with what you just described in doing more harm than good, and that's why we kind of stay away from that for the most part.
I think that's exactly it. I mean, to me,
That's
on what
good.
you
That's
describing,
what-
Sid, I mean, you have to kind of break it down and get to, what we do everywhere in industry, and you got to do the risk assessment. You have to be able to have the knowledge base, and this is why, again, the importance of collaboration is involved. Because when you sit at a table and you start talking about technology to apply for security, you got to have the right players involved. Somebody's got to sit there and know. I got to have a Rob Price that's going to sit there and know what I need from a production standpoint and what can hamper me and what can't hamper me with his cyber background to be able to have that kind of conversation, to say, yes, that is a tool that we can use. And this is what goes on in BASF. I'm just describing what goes on. They sit at the table and they talk about this. They talk about technologies. They talk about what the capabilities are. And then the guys that are OT security on my team, they sit there and they'll start describing and saying, okay, yes, but that's going to limit this flexibility that could kill production. And that's the whole balance that's got to happen. So they can be there, they can be used, but a risk assessment has to happen. You have to determine if the risk is worth a potential upset.
Okay.
Yeah, and
That's what I was-
there's also a cost factor in there, right? So the way I see, like even with just application layer, with the quote next generation firewalls, you can filter, at the application layer, and then when you get into micro segmentation and those things, it's sort of like how far do you take least privilege, in just the IT side of the world when you have a SharePoint. How far are you going to take setting up security in SharePoint down to individual user rights and so forth, right? We tend to use fairly high-level groups and things because the more granular you get with the security, the more engineering it takes and the more likely that something's going to break as well. And so it costs more to do it because it takes more engineering to do the additional segmentation. Even if you're just talking about, adding application filtering rules in your firewall, it takes more time and resources to get that set up properly. I haven't personally done micro segmentation, but it's kind of the same thing applies. Probably takes a fair bit of engineering to get that right. And it's kind of, in my opinion, kind of equivalent or analogous to, how far you would take setting up, rights on a database or something like that. Right?
Well, just let me make one comment, clarify. I mean, when I say microsegmentation, I'm being very broad here too. I've seen firewalls from those kind of networking companies where, you can define, when I say granular policies, you can define in the policy, the message will get stopped. It's not changing anything there, it's just saying this message cannot get through. And so you want to be able to control those policies. Now, having that capability in the firewall doesn't mean you have to use it. I agree with you. Why would anybody do that if you don't have to? Because it's harder to manage and all that. I get that. The other thing I think they've done, though, is they also make it easier to manage it. I mean, maybe they're dealing with their own problem,
Sid, I'm gonna go to story time now because I'll go back in time.
Love your stories.
Yeah, but and this is just to reflect on the fact that what you have to watch what you do on a security level. If I go back in time before I drafted these guys over from basically the IT side into my group to learn automation side and to develop OT security, one of the things that was happening prior to that team being developed is the restraints that were coming from an IT security side were getting so rough that these very smart control systems engineers out there in the plant, and I'll condemn myself, me included, started installing our own jump servers and started making those connections around every piece of security that was deployed by IT. And so because we needed the functionality, we just did it, okay? And IT security was, for lack of a better term, they were fat, dumb, and happy because they didn't know we were doing it in the plants. So we were doing what we needed to do to help production produce pounds of product, and we were completely going around the entire IT security system that was in place. That is why you have to watch the level of security that you place on the OT side. Our main job, my main job in BASF, although I have the security teams, is to make sure we're making pounds of product safely. And that's the core of every day I go into work. Now, we have to provide that level of security, but if we get too restrictive on it, I'm gonna have the same thing. The first thing I told Rob and him to do, I said, travel around the United States for a night and go get rid of all the jump servers. That was the first thing when I took it over, because I knew they were out there, because hell, I installed 2 of them. So I knew they were there.
Well, I did the same thing in the steel industry, just so you know. I mean, and there's tons of steel. You don't stop anything.
I mean, if the appropriate risk assessment is done, I mean, I go back and forth. I fight with these guys sometimes, okay? But when they come up to the table and they tell me, and exactly what you said, they did the risk assessment as a group, and now they're coming to me and saying, this is what we need to do, I'm fully accepting on that, and I'll push that down on the process control engineers.
The question about particular controls is kind of missing the larger strategic question. It's why don't we microsegment, or why don't we use layer 7? And I even may tolerate a little bit of intrusion activity for the sake of cybersecurity in a risk justified manner. But the question is, what is our highest return on security investment activity that we need to pursue, given where that particular business line or asset is in their cybersecurity journey? So if you haven't deployed MFA between your IT and process control environment, don't be worrying about microsegmentation, right? Eventually, all of those technologies may find a place in it, but we have to be having a threat and maturity assessment-based conversation around how we execute and manage our program overall. And then we just watch the technology develop, we watch the innovation, and we strategically put places with a focus around continuous operations, a focus around manageability, a focus on doing more from central locations to be able to allow the operations folks in a cyber mindful way to continue operations, but enable the capabilities that we need to enact those losses on our adversaries. That's my take.
And just one, you made me think of one thing. You know, I appreciate, believe me, I come from the industry too, years ago. Now, analysts, I'm not going to lose a fortune, all right, if you disrupt my work. But I used to work in the steel industry, and believe me, a steel plant is just as complex as an oil refinery or anything else. And that was the key thing, you got to keep it going. Now, turn that around today, though. We know that you're never going to stop everything. That's the big concern. Now, don't you want to be able to get that back up as fast as possible? Another part of, impact, a big part of impact, I've written a lot about in risk, is how long are you going to be down? It's one thing, I mean, I'm not talking about killing people, of course, I'm talking about downtime. The big part of that is that nobody wants to suffer any. But when you suffer it, you want to suffer as little as you can, as much as possible, right? Now, in order to reduce that time, I think a lot of these tools could be helpful. That's why it's one of my kind of thinking on it. So why wouldn't you want the capability there when you need it, but yet control it? Now maybe there's issues of controlling it. Maybe people, like you got jump server people, or server people, jump servers. Is that what you said? Yeah, jump servers. But using jump servers, but instead of jump servers, they're putting in all kinds of stuff. You can't control it because it gets hidden behind it. And then that's more dangerous. I get that.
I was going to say, I mean, one of the, when you think about why don't we even segment the network at all, the way I see it, it buys you time, right, to detect the attack. Because if they come in this part of the network and they're trying to get to this part, but you've got some segmentation. They're going to have to spend time getting across that barrier. And if you have detection capability and you can detect that attack soon enough, then maybe you can intervene and maybe prevent the attack from maturing into an impact, right? But nevertheless, if it does mature into an impact, as long as you're talking about what we call just consequential business loss from downtime, and you're not getting into a safety consequence, which would be pretty rare anyway, then it's really about your backups. That's your main recovery. Backups or maybe spares if they bricked something, right? So spares and backups are how you reduce that impact of downtime to get up as fast as possible. So backups are hugely critical, right? It's also a hard thing to do consistently, even if you bring in testing to that, right? How often do you test your backups, make sure they work? But backups are critical. Yeah.
But don't you still want the diagnostic capability? Again, I'm just throwing it out there. I think, because we tend to always talk about that, and I think it's easy to see the side. It's easy to understand. If you've been in the business and you know OT, it's easy to understand why you'd be reluctant to do certain things because of downtime and all kind of stuff. But on the other hand, when you turn it around the other way and you say, whenever you do have that incident, if you ever have it, let's hope you don't, then you want to go to somebody and say, hey, you guys up there, you experts, come and help me real quick. And they're going to go in there and they're going to say, well, I need to get this information. Where's this? Where's this? Where's that? Net flow things. And, he made a comment yesterday that a lot of firewalls don't even have net flow stuff. They won't even be able to figure out what happened. Now, maybe backups can solve that, but you got to know what is the thing that's damaged.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're trying to figure out what happened,
there's a lot of benefit to that.
Yeah, if you need to figure out what happened, it's kind of like the black box, right? You need your black box, and that's going to be making sure you're having all your event logging set up, right? Are you recording enough logging information so that you can do the forensics?
So anyhow, that's what I was throwing out.
Absolutely, but more broadly, that there's continued opportunity for improved OT protective technologies, for detective technologies, recovery technologies. All of this space is ripe for continued improvement, and our particular investments in each one of those areas need to be matched on what's happening in the industry. The best answer I have to how many locks do you need on the door is how many locks did the other guy have that got rolled, right? Using that as an informed area to particularly protect it. So I have one lock on my door, and my wife asked me to keep it locked. But I remind her, there's threat groups that have SWAT capability that could knock the whole door down, so let's just leave it unlocked. Of course not, this is absurd, right? We need to put in those protections based upon what our threat landscape are doing and how we're informed for those protections. But from overall, the ask to the OEM market, the system integrators, and to the way we run the operations is that we need to improve on every measure around it. That our protective controls that we've learned, if they go unmonitored, they fail. So the ability to gain more streaming telemetry isn't just a detective control, it is a protective control. In terms of detection, we need better telemetry from our systems and analysis. Not just the flow from Windows security event logs, which may or may not provide a value, but embedded controllers that have proprietary applications needed to extract the log for forensics has to move out in the overall environment. And then we need systems to be able to do recovery and restoration faster in processes, and a lot of technologies developing on the trade floor is moving that direction. We just got to keep up with it.
Hey, Sid.
So,
We got a question here, but I'll let them finish, if you would, Matt.
Yeah, Sid, one thing I was going to say about the zero trust and some of the other advanced IT technologies, one thing that we're talking about now at BP and OT security is not every system's created equal, kind of like Mark was saying before with the Purdue model. And should we be looking at more advanced IT technology for the DMZ layer potentially and below? And we were about to make some changes in our DMZ layer right when that CrowdStrike issue hit. We use CrowdStrike on the IT side. We haven't used it at all in OT, so we were fine in OT. But we were just coming out of a conversation about putting CrowdStrike agents on our DMZ layer, as an additional protection. But again, we didn't finish that risk assessment where, what's the threat of having something that's at the kernel level that's being updated continuously without our knowledge? And then that happened, and it kind of answered our question on what the risk level was. So we're not quite ready for that yet.
That simplified the risk analysis.
That's right.
You got your answer quick.
So real quick question. Today, throughout this discussion, they've been talking about open standards and the importance of standards, and you guys have also mentioned a few in your discussions. I was kind of interested to hear, as you think about your roles, how do you see standards helping you to bridge that gap between the the IT community and the OT community? For example, in the industrial space, we have, ISA 62443, and, I was interested, have you invested time in educating your IT brethren in that space? And I'll also be interested in understanding how you guys see adoption of that in your own communities.
I'll say how we're doing it. So we have internal standards, right? We have in the OT security space, we have a standard we use on capital projects, which is more detailed. There's more requirements there, how to build the thing, how to build the controls, antivirus infrastructure, patching infrastructure, system hardening, whatever it is. And then we have an operate standard that's more high level and focused on operations. So there's standards that are written down within Shell, and they're not 1,200 requirements like 62443 is, right? So it's some subset. And so I would say that our standards are informed by the open standards, your knowledge of those, primarily 62443 and the NIST standards. So I would say, that's how we use the open standards is okay, we're familiar with them, we know what they say, but we develop a more specific, targeted, we can't have 1,200 requirements, on a project that's not doable. So we have that tailored down to what we think is most important.
We do the same thing, Mark, so it's good to hear you say that. I mean, we have our own internal standards. We're trying to align more with 62443, but we do exactly what Mark said at BP. But you had the other part of your question was around, are you educating your IT folks? And the answer is yes. I mean, the people that come into the cross-functional teams for sure, but we have kind of just lunch and learns on what is this, right? Because people don't even know what it is and why it exists. And so, yeah, we're trying to inform the wider IT security community on why things are different and why those are there and how they're somewhat based off industry standards. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, because one of the things, and guy sitting in the front row knows this, I'm pushing right now because I don't like the concept of, in today's day and age, of just having a blob that I call my control system assets or the OT assets, and say apply standards on how we do it for that blob. My push to them is that I need standards that are focused on individual assets, because the technology, just like everything else, we're slower in process control arena. It's slower technology development, but it's still developing. And what I need on one particular asset down at the OT level may not be the same level of protection that I need on another asset that's sitting in that level. So I've been trying to push these guys, and they've been pushing back, but I try to push them to say, I'd really want you to start thinking a little bit outside the box and start thinking about the individual assets and quit making it one big group for me, so that I can get more standard structure within BASF to handle the different asset applications.
We got one, do you want to answer?
Surprise, surprise, we have our own standard. Right? It's a derivative of all the other standards that we highlighted and made some decisions that we liked or we didn't like. And now we have some standards in the community, referring to the community, that are locked behind paywalls. We have some standards that are industry consensus, but there's so few industry consensus in this space when it comes to hard questions that you get a lot of just observations and options that you can pick off like a checklist. Then we have new baseline standards that governments or particular industries are hitting with us, defining what they think is a minimum baseline standard. And then I have auditors saying, congratulations, you passed your audit, and then asset owners or plant operators saying, I passed my audit, I don't need any more of your cybersecurity tools. We're not in a good place here in terms of standards and capabilities. And I think we're thinking about the problem wrong, just sort of adjust. We first need to figure out what's good for operations. We secondly need to figure out what is good for cybersecurity. And then thirdly, we need to figure out what is good for compliance to a common understood standard. And when we approach it that way, we can have that conversation that security is not compliance and compliance isn't security in a productive manner, where we say, look, if I follow an electrical code, the likelihood of my electrical system burning up is relatively low. I got the gauging right and the connectivity, but that may not be a reliable system. I may have to do other things on top of that to be able to hit my particular objectives. When we approach our standards conversation in space in that item, I think things clear up better. I think I can have more productive conversations about what the minimum baseline is. They can be applied across the diverse portfolio of process control environments, but that I can still have productive conversations that we need next generation AV technology X, Y, or Z because it counters these specific threats. I don't know, that's my 2 cents on standards.
Okay, we got only time for one more question. I think
Yeah.
Michael Elliott.
Hi, my name is Mike Elliott with Kenview. So I've got a question that's maybe leading into the conversation that was just had. One of the biggest problems I've faced between IT and OT is asset inventory management, right? We all know, like in IT, maybe I have ServiceNow, so I'm very comfortable in knowing I've got a complete inventory, but I'm wondering what each of your perspective is around OT inventory and how you discover new assets. Maybe it's that rogue jump server. And how do you know that that device is added so that you've got your OT inventory evergreen so that you can trust where your threats may be within your OT landscape?
I give it a go. It's something we're working on, something we've been working on forever. I think the first thing we said is part of our policy, we have someone that's accountable at every asset for our security. They would call it the single point of accountability, the SPA for cyber. And one of the requirements is for them to have an inventory. So they have it, it's usually in a spreadsheet, something like that. But we also have monitoring tools that are passive that will go out and collect a level of inventory. Is it great? No. But we have initiatives now going on to try to get more and more inventory. But what we're trying to do now is let's leverage the inventory that we do have, right? Let's not wait until we have everything. Let's find those jump servers. Let's find out what's critical. Let's start putting additional controls or visibility around or monitoring around those while we're continuing to improve that inventory journey. But it's manual entry. It's some automation. It's a bit of a journey that we're on when it comes to trying to collect and keep evergreen that OT inventory, I'd say.
I would have to say, I would call it the layered approach, where you're using as much automation as you can to collect the data, but it's never 100%, right? So you're always going to it's always going to result in a layer of doing manual entry, right? So we had at least found a solution that does it 100%. So it's going to be a combination of what's in the network management system, what's in the anomaly, the anomaly and breach detection system that we're rolling out now. We're putting a certain amount of, it's going to be used to collect more inventory, right? Because they can figure out inventory by looking at the network traffic. So between network management and anomaly breach detection, that's kind of the automated collection. The rest of it's going to kind of be, manual entry.
I would say that we're definitely not there yet. But it is something, because what I really would like to see, and I'm actually going to start down, if we talk about the Purdue model again, down at layer 2 and below. And I've been pushing to try to find, we have some, I would say, homegrown little tool that we're utilizing right now to try to get a baseline. And then I'd really like to see that eventually get automated to where when a device is connected anywhere, whether it's the L2 network, whether it's the, all the way down to L0, down to the field instrumentation, especially with us in starting to incorporate APL, I want something to detect when something's hung on there. So I would love to see it get there. I would love to see it get to the point where I can physically detect something that's happening. You know, somebody puts a new server box on my control system network,
server.
I get an alarm.
Jump server.
That is a feature.
You got the danger though too, like, and I'm okay. I'm gonna back you up here, Rob, because he hits me with this all the time. You got the danger associated with pinging and getting that data out there to your overall process network. And again, it's a risk assessment of having this run automated and what it potentially can do in a risk assessment to the operation of the production unit. So yeah, I agree. It's a gap right now I'd love to see filled, but they keep reminding me, okay, Keith, you told us we can't, you want this, but you told us we can't shut the plant down. And I can't guarantee you that something won't happen on the network, bogs it down, and the plant shuts down. So,
Yeah, I would say that over time, the reason that there's still manual entry is because there's still scenarios where we have IP addressable equipment that there's no routable path to get to it from your platform that you would collect it from. And so over time, that stuff will be fixed. You know, as you modernize your plant, I think eventually everything will have a routable path to your upper layer where you have these management tools. And at that point, it'll be more like IT, and you can collect everything automatically.
Hey, can I say one more point on that? I don't know if there's any Mac vendors in the room, but I read this article last week called the Mac vendor blockade or the OEM blockade. And it was basically like, the systems aren't secure by design, and we can't put certain tools on them. We can't use those IT tools on them because we're going to breach a contract and we won't have support for our systems. And we have to fix that problem because there's a lot of tools that could go on these systems and be able to give us what we need without having to do a bunch of spam ports and try to interpret what endpoint this is off a network. If they would make some changes, the problem is they want to keep things closed and then want to sell you their services a lot of times. And I think the Mac vendors got to help us out here because we're doing a lot of things that we wouldn't have to do if they would start to change how they build their systems.
Okay, I'm sure we actually ran over time, didn't we? Yeah, 5 minutes over. You guys saved me. I only ask one question. Actually asked two, but anyhow, would you like to help join me in giving them an applause? It was a very good panel.